year from Detroit, Michigan, studying education. She will be graduating this coming April with honors, and she'll be attending graduate school after that, pursuing a double master's in social work and public policy. Her goal is to become a social worker and work on the foster care system to reform it so that it makes the system safer and more effective for the children in it. During her time at EGSU, she has been involved with several organizations, including but not limited to the President's Leadership Academy, the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and the Black Student Union. Some of her favorite memories at BEG have included bringing new members into her sisterhood, going to a hockey game, and seeing the sunset at Deut. I have not been there, so I need to find out where that is. In her free time, she likes to watch movies and TV shows on various streaming sites, and she spends a lot of time with her dog Kaido playing fetch and training him, and I believe we're going to see some pictures. Kyrsten's speech today is entitled "The Legacy We Leave, Spaces for Us and by Us." And she came up with this topic only knowing that she wanted to speak from her experiences as a student here at the university. Her speech encompasses not only parts of her journey here, but also the experiences of other students. In curating her speech, she said that she wanted to she delivered not only a message, but also a charge to the audience. She's excited to be the keynote speaker for today and is ready to share her knowledge with all of us. So welcome, Kyrsten, and we look forward to your presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank Purdue for allowing me to be here. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited. I've never really done anything like this before. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share with you all my presentation I prepared. But first, I want to give a little bit more about me. I know there was some introduction, like some opening stuff, but I wanted to make it a little more personal. So this is me. I am an avid binge watcher. I've pretty much seen, not every show on Netflix, that's a little dramatic, but I've seen a lot of shows on there. I like to read books. I'm a dog mom, so there's Kaido up there. It's my pride and joy. And then I'm also an aspiring TikTok star because why not? So I also wanted to include a couple of organizations that are important to me in this slide, on this slide, just to give you a little more information about me. So as mentioned, I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So that is a picture of all of us from homecoming. The next slide over is NPHC, which is the National Pan-Hellenic Council, which governs all of our Black Greek-letter organizations, and that is where I serve as president. This is my second term there, so they have a special place in my heart. The next slide, well, down is a picture of me and my mom, because that's my homegrown. And then this picture in the middle is the PLA, which is the Sydney Arizona President's Leadership Academy. I'm part of the 2019 cohort, and that has been a very monumental part of my time at BGSU, so I felt it was important to put that in there. And then the last picture is Black Student Union, which also is one of my favorite boards I've been in. I'm not in an exec position now, but it was definitely one of my favorite organizations. So I included this because, number one, I felt like it was important for me to humanize myself a little bit and become not a name on a paper, but actually be a person. But I also did it because I wanted to make sure that I was emphasizing that this wasn't going to be like a typical keynote speech. I feel like sometimes when you go to events like this and there's a keynote, they're very kind of like step in the box and it's very like stand still. And I would mind to be more like a conversation, more like a interaction and less at me talking about you, because I think sometimes keynote speakers, they have like all these degrees and they travel all over the world. I'm 21. I'm working on my first degree, gonna get another one, fingers crossed. But I don't have all this worldly experience, but somehow I still ended up in the same position as all those other people, so yeah. So yes, and then going off of that, also there's going to be some areas in there where I'm going to do like a little call and response to make sure you're awake, but also to make it a little more interactive. If you see something or hear something, you're like, oh, that's really interesting, or like, feel free to ooh and ah, you know. I like to think I'm funny, so if you hear some jokes, feel free to laugh, it'll help my ego. And yeah, I think, yeah, see, we're getting there. So first, I wanted to start off by just giving an overview of kind of what I'm going to do. So what I just did was my introduction, and then I'm going to explain spaces for us, by us, and then I'm going to explain the legacy. The title of my speech is "The Legacy We Leave, Spaces But I'm gonna do that in the reverse because that is really just how my brain works. And the title sounded better the way it's written, but the presentation doesn't work that way. So we're just gonna go with it. But as I'm going through it, I ran this a couple times and I rehearsed it with like some of my family members, and they were listening to it and they were like, I didn't get it, and it didn't make sense up until like the very end, and then the conclusion is like 3 minutes out of this entire like 40-minute speech. So I promise it'll make sense. Hang in there. It won't be boring. It'll be great.
All right.
So yeah, this is the title of my speech once again. Like I said, that's the way it's written, but we're gonna do it in the reverse. So first, we're gonna start off by talking about spaces. Before I go into that, I felt like it was important to first define what diversity is, because this is the symposium on diversity, and I think it's important to kind of illustrate what is diversity and how that's gonna play into it. So repeat after me, diversity. So diversity is the state of being diverse or having variety. I think that fits in the noun form, and when you take it as more of an action-oriented item, it's the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. So when you think about how to put diversity into perspective and what diversity really is, I think it breaks down into two components where you have diversity and then there's a difference between having it and valuing it. So anyone can say that you have diversity in a space, in a workplace, in any kind of department. You can say, oh, we have these different numbers, we have all these kind of people from all these different backgrounds. But if you have those people in a space and you don't have elements in there that support them, do you really value the diversity that you bring into your space? So I think it's important to have, I think diversity is a good thing to have, of course, in these spaces. And you, of course, want to have diverse perspectives, diverse backgrounds, diverse people, but are you really valuing the diversity you have in those spaces if you don't bring in certain supports to help them? For example, and I should have prefaced this a few minutes ago, but I'm only going to speak from my experiences. For the most part, like I said, I don't have all this other experience that other speakers have, so I'm going to speak from my experiences and those that have been relayed to me as a college student. But I think anything that I'm going to say could be applied to any kind of workspace, any department. But moving forward. So to put this example into perspective, if you have a first generation college student, for example, and you say, we really welcome first generation college students, we really value having them here, that's all well and good, that's diversifies your population of college students, but what resources do you offer to them being a first generation college student that they might not have, as opposed to someone who has parents and grandparents and a bunch of other people who went to college. Now, granted, they might not need those resources. They might say, no, that's okay, I'm good, like, I know what I'm doing, and that's great. But can you really say that you put a value on diversity if you don't support those diverse measures that you put into place? Does that make sense? Okay. So like I said, I can only speak from my experiences, so that's what I'm gonna do. This is a list of organizations that I have been a part of where I've held a leadership position. This is not a complete list of all the orgs that I've ever been in. This is just where I held some kind of leadership, some kind of role that elevated me past just being a general member. Out of all the things on this list, I would probably say that there are 4, maybe 5, arguably, where I felt that my perspective held a certain value to that organization. This is not to bash any of the orgs on here. This is simply just my experience and kind of a call to action to what can be done better to support students when they are in leadership positions, but also when they come from a different background outside of your own. I felt like it was important to include this because, like I said, I can only speak from my experiences and what I've experienced, but I know that I'm not alone in the way that I feel, and I know that this information could also help someone else. So to further illustrate that, I'm going to talk about spaces that are for us and by us and how they affect these 3 different areas. So spaces for us by us, that term, FUBU, for us, by us, originated in the 90s. It was coined as a term that kind of described when you have a space that is designed for you, insert whatever identity you identify with there, and by other people who also share the identity. So as a Black woman, I would have a space that is for Black women, by Black women. And like I said, you can exchange that with any other identity or any other piece of you that you feel fits, and that would be for you and by you. So when you have spaces like that that are designed for you and by you, they bring in a lot of benefits that spaces that are not like that wouldn't necessarily give you, because you're kind of putting yourself in a space that wasn't designed for you. And while that is helpful, there are certain supports that it may lack that spaces that are for you and by you will not. So starting off first, we're going to start with retention rates. Retention rates at colleges, specifically for Black students, tend to waver a lot, and that's not just here, that's nationally. And across the board, what I've noticed is that students who are involved in organizations, period, those rates waver. But when they're involved in orgs that are designed for them and by them, they don't waver as much. So they will be retained longer over the term of 4 years or even 5 years, and they will graduate because they feel like they have been able to make a place at their university, at their school. When you have groups that are designed for you and by you, it allows you to connect with a community of people who understand what you are going through, and thus you are able to stay at that school longer because you feel like you have a place. The same can hold true with school spirit. So taking that example, if there's a football game this weekend, and I'm like, no, I'd rather stay, I don't really want to go out. But all my friends that I met in this club are going, now I have more of an incentive to go. So in going to the game, and let's say it's a football game, and fingers crossed, let's say we win, then I get the feeling of I get to rush the field with the rest of the students, I get to celebrate with my friends. I'm really feeling like I belong in this external community that I originally maybe not, I probably wouldn't have been a part of if I was sitting in the back of the football field, like sitting at the top of the bleachers by myself, just watching the game from afar. It gives you a more hands-on experience in the school, and it makes you feel more connected and really connects you to that community of care that you want to see at a university. And both those things also contribute to a sense of value. Not that your value should be based on other people, because that's not healthy. But naturally, some of it might come from other people, because I feel like that's a natural human aspect. So if you don't feel like you have a sense of value among your community of people or among the group that you're in, why would you want to stay at that school? When we lack these things, when retention rates are falling, when you don't have any school spirit, and when you already don't feel like you have a sense of value, that's when we start to see students disconnect from schools. That's when you see them withdrawing in their classes. They will withdraw from activities. They'll probably go home more on the weekends. They'll start to disconnect because they don't have anything that is cementing them to the university or to the department or to your workplace. Like I said, insert whatever fits for you in there. That's when you see people start to withdraw and disconnect, because that sense of diversity that has been preached to them and that has been valued has not been supported. So some of these things can be affected a little easier depending on your environment. So speaking as a Black student, if I was at a historically Black college or university, it might be easier for me to feel school spirit and feel a sense of value, because naturally I'm already surrounded by people who look like me, so there's already bound to be some natural connection. But I don't put any of this up there to say that it can't be changed by your environment. Just because I'm not at an HBCU doesn't mean that I can't find my community or find my people here at BG. It just means I might have to work harder and look a little harder. And that's where those spaces come into play. When you can put more funding and more effort and more support into those spaces that you know are going to help the diverse population that you say you value and bring into play, you are able to connect those students more and keep them more. So not only do you have the diversity that you market, you also are supporting it and bringing in support for those students so they can feel like they have a purpose and like they have value. All right, so somebody say, what is a legacy?
What is a legacy?
I'm so glad you asked, thank you. So I define a legacy in two different parts. I define legacies as big legacies and small legacies, but I don't want to go any further in my presentation without acknowledging what today is and why we have this day off. So as you all know, today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Today is the day that we celebrate him and his life and his legacy and all the things that he did. So I have a video that I want to play that talks a little bit more about his life and legacy, because I could go on and on for another, who knows how long, and explain everything, but someone already did it. Someone already put in the work. We're going to work smarter, not harder. So I'm going to play this video, but as you think about it, I want you to think about what moments in his life or what moments in his career you think impacted his legacy, and what things you think really kind of cemented his name in stone.
Dr. King was born in Atlanta on January 15th, 1929, down on Auburn Avenue. And Dr. King grew up in a household with his parents, Martin Luther King Sr. and his mother, but also his grandparents, the Reverend A.D. Williams and his wife. Now, the Reverend Williams had become the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church on Auburn Avenue. And that becomes the family church. So it's the church in which Marty King grows up and is raised. Now, Dr. King himself is educated in the public schools of Atlanta. He goes off to Booker T. Washington High School here in Atlanta before getting to matriculate at Morehouse College, which is where his father had gone to school. After Morehouse College, Marty King decides to go off to seminary, and he attends Crozier Theological Seminary up in Pennsylvania. After Crozier, he goes to Boston University. In Boston, he meets a very attractive young woman. Her name is Coretta Scott. They get married, and they debate what to do. Coretta Scott King was not interested in returning to the South. Martin King was. So he interviews at several churches and is tendered an offer at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. They have a child, and then the bus boycott occurs.
Eventually, segregation in public transportation will pass away. And I think we should start now preparing for the inevitable.
King is recruited to be the head of the Montgomery Improvement Association. He takes on that responsibility after much prayer and thought. Now, in Montgomery, the effort to organize for the protest results in success with the bus boycott's conclusion in 1956, but also the desire to keep the protest going. So in 1957, the pastors involved in the Montgomery Improvement Association, by this point Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Ralph D. Abernathy, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, these figures, joined by others, will organize what's called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The SCLC will be organized with the purpose of taking this protest regionally and leading civil rights reform in America. In February of 1960, Martin Luther King and his family moved to Atlanta. King accepted the co-pastorate of Ebenezer Baptist Church under his father, and the family moved into a house on Boulevard. Now, King would then go on from his position at Ebenezer Baptist Church to lead the civil rights movement. In August of 1963, civil rights leaders gathered in Washington, D.C. A. Philip Randolph had proposed what was called a March on Washington for Jobs. And the point was for black people to come to Washington and insist that they be given equal access for employment. Thousands came. And it was a peaceful demonstration, occupying the nation's capital for a day, to listen to speeches being delivered from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on the National Mall. And among those speaking were Fred Shuttlesworth, John Lewis, who was the chairman of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But the person who stole the limelight, of course, was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose I Have a Dream speech captured better than anyone ever had before the goals and aspirations, not just of black people, but of everybody.
Oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Do you have any business in the courthouse?
The only business we have was to come by to the Board of Registers to register.
The Board of Registrars is not in session this afternoon, as you were informed. You came down to make a mockery out of this courthouse, so we're not going to have it.
After the Civil Rights Act and the March on Washington, attention turned to the voting rights and the denial by white governments to register black voters. But the climax occurs in Selma, Alabama, where in the middle of Alabama's Black Belt in the old plantation district, black people had been denied access to the ballot. And Dr. King and SCLC will support the demonstrations there. So coming in to work with SNCC in Dallas County, Alabama, SCLC will organize protests around the county government that was refusing to register black voters. This culminates in what's called the Selma Campaign of March of 1965. Now, Dr. King is not there on Bloody Sunday when John Lewis and Hosea Williams lead a march out of Brown's Chapel AME Church across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and are beaten by Alabama state troopers. All of it captured on film, all of it broadcast around the nation and the world, all of it leading to a Selma to Montgomery march that Dr. King did lead. And indeed, President Johnson did propose and the Congress did pass that voting rights legislation. King comes back to Atlanta, meets with his advisors in SCLC, and he says, we've got to organize the poor of our country and promote human rights. And he sets forth an agenda for what's called the Poor People's Campaign. King came back to the notion of occupying the nation's capital, encouraging the poor people from across America to come to Washington, D.C. and to remain there until the system opened up and addressed their needs and their concerns. This wasn't for black people only. This was for white people, for Native Americans, for Asians, for everybody. And he encouraged them all to come. So it fit when in Memphis, Tennessee, black men who were working as garbage men, cleaning the streets, when they went on strike to demand a living wage. Now, Memphis, Tennessee, and next to the Mississippi Delta, the big plantation area, the agricultural South was full of poor people who were unemployed and needing work. And so in Memphis, the city leaders didn't pay workers very much money because there was always somebody out there who would do the job for less. And those garbage men went on strike, and their motto was, I am a man. And they stood up to say, we deserve a living wage. They asked King to come support them. How could he not? Living wages for working people? It fit the objectives of the Poor People Campaign. And so he goes. And it's there in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, an assassin shoots him down on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, bringing to an end his life, but not his legacy. That Poor People's Campaign was held in Washington, D.C. The Reverend Ralph D. Abernathy assumed the presidency of the SCLC, and within weeks of Dr. King's murder, his widow, Coretta Scott King, would begin promoting the idea of a Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, which might forever teach the values of that Kingian nonviolence that he promoted. So his legacy continues. It continues in the King holiday we have every January. It continues in the drive for human rights, in the building of civil rights memorials at all of these venues where the demonstrations took place.
So as I mentioned, I describe a legacy in the terms of what I like to describe as small legacies and big legacies. So starting off with big legacies, I think these are these overall life accomplishments, these like super big, impactful moments that really are what cement your legacy or change aspects of your life that you probably didn't imagine, but are these big things and kind of like what you're remembered for. So it's gonna be a little chaotic, but I just want everyone to kind of shout out things that they think in terms of Dr. King, what are his big legacy moments for these overall life accomplishments that he did.
Yeah.
Okay, heard the March on Washington. Don't be shy.
His speech.
On that Poor People's Conference he organized.
Poor People's Campaign, yeah, the speech, I Have a Dream speech, that's a good one. One more. Bus boycott, yeah. So those are good examples of some of those big things that he did, the things that we kind of remember him for, the Civil Rights Movement, the March from Selma to Washington, the I Have a Dream speech, Poor People's Campaign. Those are some of those really big moments that cemented his legacy that we remember him for. Small legacies, on the other hand, are those little interactions that you might have with people so they can be conversations, or moments that just affect your split decisions that aren't necessarily exactly what you're remembered for, but they are still very impactful to your legacy. So if you think about your whole legacy or your whole life being this big, you would have some big moments, like here's a big legacy, here's another one, here's that new job, here's a new promotion, you know, the birth of your child for my mom, it was me, the biggest legacy. All these super big moments. And then everything in between are kind of those small legacies. So the little things that happen in between, those are those small moments. So, but they are not, just because they are small, I don't want that to be confused, meaning that they're insignificant. They are just, in the grand scheme of things, they might take up less time, they might have been a culmination of less effort, but not necessarily insignificant. So to give an example of that, imagine this. Let's say you are on your way to work and you're having a terrible day. And I mean like terrible, and it's only 9 a.m. Starbucks got your order wrong, you got a flat tire on the way to work, your partner was stressing you out, it's just not a good day. So you go into work, you know you have a presentation that you have to pitch to the board, and you're like, you know what, I'm just not ready, we're just not gonna do it. And you're on a team with other people, and you're like, no, we're just not gonna do it, we're not ready, I'm not ready to head up this charge, we'll do it a different day. So on your way in, you run into your coworker, and your coworker's like, hey, good morning, and you're like, no, can't do this today. And they're like, what do you mean, we have a presentation today, it's gonna be great. And you're like, you know what, I'm sick of you, I'm not having a good day, you're really getting on my nerves, I wish you would quit your job, and I wish you never worked here. And you go back to your desk, and you're like, I'm glad I got that off my chest, they've been getting on my nerves for 5 years, I'm tired of working with them, I just can't. And you go back the rest of your day, you don't do your presentation. You come into work to do your presentation the next day, and your coworker's not there. You're like, maybe they took me up, I'm off, or maybe they quit. Good grades. I don't want to see them anyway. 10 years goes by, and you're sitting at home, feet kicked up, you're watching the news, and you see your coworker on TV, and they're getting interviewed because they created this multi-billion-dollar app. And you're like, whoa, I haven't done this the last 10 years. It's cool. And so you turn it up, and you see your coworker on there, and the interviewer is like, you know, how'd you get your start? What made you want to create this app? And they're like, well, about 10 years ago, I was working a 9-to-5 job. I hated it. You know, I was just doing it to get by. I thought that was going to be my career, even though I didn't like it. And I remember one day, one of my coworkers just came in, and they snapped on me for no reason. Like, I was just there. I was ready to present. And they told me that they wish I never worked there, and they wish I quit my job. I would quit my job. And I turned in my resignation letter that day, went home, used what money I had left, started my app, started my Upstart, and now 10 years later, here I am. So for you, that conversation is just a small legacy. Because I bet if you talk to that coworker, they may not be very fond of you because of the way you treated them. So that kind of affected your legacy. But for them, that was a big moment. That was an overall life, that was an impactful moment for them. That's part of their big legacy because that changed the entire trajectory of their life. Now, would they have gone along a couple years later and quit their job? Maybe. But who's to say that they would have went and started some app that got them $1 million? They might have just quit and went to another job. They could have did anything. But in that moment, you were affecting someone else's legacy. All that to say that when we think about a legacy, sometimes we think about ourselves and we think about this has to be me. And sometimes it's more about the people around you and the people that affect you, and that really affects the overall trajectory of your legacy. People who have legacies don't really wake up in the morning and say, I'm gonna have a legacy today. Now, and if you do, that's your business. I think the grand majority of people don't know. I think Dr. King is a great example of that. Because of all these things that all you said are things that really impacted his legacy, I think it's important to remember that man just wanted to be a reverend. He wanted to be in a church, he wanted to grow and be the highest ranking that you can be in a church, and that was kind of what he wanted to do. But the situations and the people around him would not allow it. Because of his character and because of the person he was, he could not know that he had a platform inside of the church, as big or as small as it was, and just stand there idly while all these things were happening to people who looked like him. In the space that he occupied, he knew that he could do more with what he had. And so he used his platform to talk about the issues of Black people, and all people, but starting off with Black people in his community. And he used his platform in the church to kind of talk about those issues and highlight them and say, we have to start making some changes. We have to start standing up for ourselves because they're not going to do it. And in turn, people just started to listen to him. And they started to push him up on a higher platform, and he continued that momentum and used it and said, well, if people are going to listen to me and we're going to be able to affect some real change, let me run with this. I think if you would have asked him at 18, he didn't think he was going to be the face and have the legacy that he has now. When he was 18, he probably would have been like, I just want to find me a good woman, settle down in this church, maybe have some kids, and that'll be that. It's important to think about this when you think about legacy, because what you do and who you are and who you interact with will ultimately affect you, negatively or positively. But legacies are not created solely for you. They're created because of the things that happen to you. I'm a good example. Like I said, I never thought I would be doing anything like this. I'm excited to be here, but I consider this, where I am now, to be an impactful moment for my legacy. I'm going to be able to write about this and say, like, I did a keynote speech in my school, I presented all this kind of information. But if you asked me a year ago, I would have been like, I guarantee you I'll only focus on graduation. I was trying to get out of here. I'll be packing my bags in January and I'll graduate till April. But here I am. These are a lot of work. So, what does it all mean? To connect these overall ideas, when you think about a legacy in space, I know they seem like very separate concepts, but they are not. Think about the spaces or the organizations or departments that you were in and what they occupy. Think about your spaces as being a small legacy. The people you meet inside of those spaces and in those organizations, it may seem like it's just something that's helping you get by right now. Being a part of your sorority, being a part of your fraternity, being a part of your favorite organization, your sports team, whatever you have it, may seem like it's just something to help you get by now. But you never know what people you will meet inside of those, what connections you'll make, who you'll connect to, and how it will help you submit yourself at your school, work, job, how it will help you and how it will affect your overall legacy. The people I've met, the sisters I have in my sorority will more than likely affect me from here and now until forever. And who knows what kind of connections will come from that will cement my legacy even further moving forward. When you think about having this overall grand legacy, you're often going to reflect back on those spaces that made you feel valued, that made you feel important, that made you feel like you had a place, and there'll be some kind of marker for you to be thankful for. If you apply that to Dr. King, I think the church that he was in is his small legacy, and it helped him gain the confidence of public speaking, being in front of a crowd, having all those people skills that you need to be the face of a movement as big as the civil rights movement. The main things that I want you to take away from this presentation are these. Spaces that are for us and by us matter, especially when you are the minority or the marginalized identity. It's really important for you to find a space, even if you are not a minority or a marginalized identity, but especially when you are, it's really important for you to find a space where you feel valued and where you feel like you matter. It is going to make all the difference. I can think off the top of my head of 5 people that I knew when I started college that have no longer finished because they did not feel like they had a place here. And if I know 5, that means everyone in the audience probably knows 5. And that's not a good thing. It's very, very important to be able to find those spaces and connect to people so you feel like you matter, so you feel like you have a place, so you can finish. Because when all the other problems of the world are weighing down on you, you should have a safe space where you can confide in people who you know that you trust and you know care about you enough to help you through it and to make sure that you finish what you started. And in turn, you can also help them. Number 2, legacies are not just about you, they are about the community around you. So if you are someone who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm gonna have a legacy today, you need to be very intentional about who you interact with. You need to be very careful in the way that you govern yourself. But importantly, what is the thing that you want to be remembered for, and why is it so important to you to be remembered? And what does that say about the community around you? When you think about your overall legacy, it's not just going to be about you. It's going to be about the community that you impacted and the community around you and what you create with the people around you. So if you all walk away from this speech and you say that it was terrible, that negatively impacts my legacy. You're going to be like, that was terrible. No one should ever do anything. They shouldn't ask her to do anything ever again. Hopefully you wouldn't say that, but you know. That would overall impact my legacy, but because it's not just about me. It's about all of you and what you take away from this and what you gain from it. And lastly, be kind and be intentional to each other. Most importantly, it's important for us to be kind and intentional because you never know what kind of community you are impacting negatively or positively when you react or when you talk to people in certain kind of ways. We need to speak to each other with care and also with intention, because it's important to us to create this community of care and to keep in mind that whatever you do could affect someone. And even though it's a very hard skill to do, it's hard to kind of separate things. It's hard to separate things and say, like, I know I'm having a bad day, but how do I not ruin someone else's day? How do I let my bad day just be me? And how do I take myself away from it? That's a hard thing to do. But I think it's an important thing to kind of actively be working on, because you never know how you can be impacting someone's legacy. So that's it for me. Like I said, my name is Kyrsten. I put my email up there because I feel like that's just a professional thing to do. That's my dog, Kygo. If you really want to get me off on a tangent, ask me some questions about him. I promise you, we'll be here all night. I'll specifically tell you how he woke me up at 5:30 this morning. But I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have been here. I hope this was meaningful. Like I said when I started, I didn't want to do just kind of a standstill presentation thing. I wanted to make sure that it connected to my experiences, but also conveyed the experiences of students who are like me, because I don't know how many students get to actually be in this kind of position. So it's important to me to make sure that it was a student experience and not just about me. You know, let me see it's about the community around you. See where I'm going with this. But I'm really grateful for the opportunity to really just have been here and to be able to speak to all of you. I want to encourage you to view all of the posters and the research that has been presented. These students put up, these look really good. I don't think I could have done this. I really encourage you to kind of take a look around, ask some questions about their research. I'm pretty sure they would appreciate it. They put a lot of hard work into it. Also, this is not a day off. This is a day on. So if you have not signed up for service or you need some service to do, I believe all the things are filled, but you can talk to Amanda. I don't know where she is, but she'll be around. She's back at the table. She can direct you to some service opportunities, but please remember that this is a day on and not a day off. Of course, take care of yourself, do some mental health things if you need to, some self-care things, but try to give back to the community that's around